The ink on the page was blurring because Sarah couldn't stop the tears from falling. She stood in the center of the lavish ballroom, surrounded by 300 of the city's elite, holding a pen that felt heavier than lead. Her husband, James, stood with his arm around another woman, smirking as he waited for Sarah to sign away her life. The crowd whispered, enjoying her humiliation. She thought this was the end, the moment she lost everything. But she had no idea that the old man in the charcoal suit walking through the double doors wasn't just a guest. He was holding a secret that would turn this Christmas party into a bloodbath of revenge. Sarah wasn't just a discarded wife. She was about to become the most powerful woman in the room. The chandelier above the grand ballroom of the Remington estate cost more than the house Sarah grew up in. It glittered with 10,000 crystals, casting a cold, fractured light over the guests below. It was Christmas Eve, the most magical night of the year for everyone else. But for Sarah, it felt like a funeral. She stood near a towering spruce tree, decorated in gold and silver, clutching a glass of sparkling water she hadn't taken a sip of. She wore a simple, elegant navy dress, one she had saved for 3 months to buy. It was tasteful, modest, and completely invisible compared to the diamonds dripping off the women around her. "Try not to look so pathetic, Sarah," a sharp voice hissed near her ear. Sarah flinched and turned to see Catherine, her mother-in-law. Catherine was a woman made of steel and hairspray, wrapped in a red velvet gown that looked like it had been dipped in blood. "I'm just waiting for James, Catherine," Sarah said softly, her grip tightening on her glass. "He said he'd meet me here for the first dance." Catherine laughed, a dry, brittle sound. "The first dance? Oh, honey, you really don't pay attention to the world you married into, do you? James has important guests to entertain. Investors, partners, people who actually matter to the future of this family." She raked her eyes over Sarah's dress with undisguised disdain. "And honestly, look at you. You fade into the background. A man like James needs a wife who shines, not one who lingers." Sarah bit her lip, tasting the metallic tang of blood. It had been like this for 3 years. 3 years of apologizing for existing. 3 years of trying to be the perfect wife for James, the rising star of the Remington shipping empire. She had cooked his meals, ironed his shirts, and tolerated his late nights and smelling of strange perfume, all because she believed in the vows she took, for better or for worse. "I'm his wife, Catherine," Sarah said, trying to summon a backbone she felt was slowly dissolving. "That should matter." "Titles are temporary," Catherine said, her eyes drifting toward the center of the room. "Legacies are forever." Just then, the crowd parted. A hush fell over the room, followed by a ripple of excited whispers. Sarah's heart leaped. James was coming. He walked into the light, looking devastatingly handsome in a custom tuxedo. His dark hair was perfectly coiffed, his smile dazzling. But he wasn't walking toward Sarah. Linked on his arm was Jessica. Sarah felt the air leave her lungs. Jessica was everything Sarah wasn't. The daughter of a senator. She was blonde, loud, and draped in emerald silk that left very little to the imagination. A massive diamond necklace rested on her collarbone, a necklace Sarah recognized from the family catalogue James had told her was off-limits due to budget cuts in the company. James and Jessica laughed as they moved through the crowd, accepting champagne flutes, shaking hands. They looked like the couple on the top of the wedding cake. Sarah stood by the Christmas tree, feeling like the ghost of Christmas past. "He looks happy," Catherine whispered cruelly. "Doesn't he?" Sarah set her glass down on a passing waiter's tray with a trembling hand. She couldn't do this. Not tonight. She began to turn toward the exit, needing to find a bathroom, a closet, anywhere to hide until the tears stopped. "Where are you going?" James's voice boomed across the short distance. Sarah froze. She turned back. James had spotted her. He wasn't smiling anymore. He looked annoyed, like she was a stain on his perfectly polished evening. He steered Jessica toward her, the crowd forming a semicircle around them, sensing drama. I wasn't feeling well, James," Sarah stammered. "I thought I'd go upstairs." "Nonsense," James said, his voice loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "We have an announcement to make. You need to be here for it. It involves you, after all." Jessica giggled, covering her mouth with a manicured hand. "Oh, James, don't be so mean. Let her sit down. She looks pale." "She's fine," James said dismissively. He snapped his fingers, and a man in a grey suit, James's personal lawyer, Mr. Henderson, stepped out of the shadows. He was holding a thick manila envelope. Sarah's stomach dropped. "James, what is this?" The music died down. The chatter stopped. 300 pairs of eyes were fixed on Sarah. "It's a gift, Sarah," James said, his eyes cold and dead. "Since it's Christmas, I thought I'd give you what you deserve." James took the envelope from the lawyer and tossed it onto the small cocktail table in front of Sarah. It landed with a heavy thud, sliding into a bowl of holly and pine cones. "Open it," he commanded. Sarah's hands shook so badly she could barely lift the flap. She pulled out the documents. The bold, black letters at the top screamed at her. Decree of dissolution of marriage, divorce papers. The room went silent. You could hear the ice melting in the champagne buckets. "James," Sarah whispered, her voice cracking. "Here. Now? Why wait?" James shrugged, adjusting his cufflinks. "New year, new beginnings. I didn't want to drag this into January. It's bad for the fiscal projections." "I don't understand," Sarah cried, tears finally spilling over. "I've done everything for you. I've been loyal. I've loved you when you had nothing." "When I had nothing?" James laughed, and the sound was ugly. "Sarah, I'm a Remington. I've never had nothing. But you're a waitress I picked up because I thought you were quaint. A little charity project. But let's be honest, you don't fit in here. You never have. You're boring, you're poor, and frankly, you're embarrassing me." Jessica stepped forward, resting her chin on James's shoulder. "It's okay, sweetie," she purred to Sarah. "James needs a woman who understands his world, someone with pedigree. Don't worry, we won't throw you out on the street tonight. You can stay in the guest cottage until the morning." "The guest cottage?" Catherine chimed in, stepping up to her son. "You're too generous, James. She has parents in Ohio, doesn't she? Let her take a bus." Sarah felt like she was being stoned to death, but instead of rocks, they were using words. She looked around the room, pleading with her eyes for someone, anyone, to step in. To say this was cruel, to say this was wrong. But the guests, the wealthy bankers, the socialites, the business tycoons, they just watched. Some sipped their drinks. Some smirked. To them, this was entertainment, a live reality show. "Sign them," James said, pointing to the pen Mr. Henderson was holding out. "Sign them now, and I'll give you a settlement check for $10,000. That's more money than you've ever seen in your life. Walk away, Sarah." "And if I don't?" Sarah asked, a sudden spark of anger cutting through her grief. James leaned in close, his cologne suffocating her. "Then I drag this out in court. I have the best lawyers in the state. I will bury you in legal fees. I will make sure you leave this marriage with nothing but the debt from your student loans. I will ruin your credit, your reputation, and your future. Sign the papers, take the 10 grand, and disappear." Sarah looked at the pen. $10,000. It was an insult. It was a payoff to go away quietly so he could marry his senator's daughter. She looked at James, the man she had vowed to love forever. The man she had nursed back to health when he had pneumonia last year. The man she had defended to her own family. There was no love in his eyes, only calculation. "Fine," Sarah whispered. "Good girl," Catherine sneered. Sarah took the pen. She bent over the table. The tears dripped from her chin, staining the paper, blurring the legal jargon that said she was unwanted. She felt small. She felt worthless. She signed her name. Sarah Miller. "There," she choked out, dropping the pen. "Are you happy?" James snatched the papers up, checking the signature. A wide, victorious grin broke across his face. Ecstatic. "Henderson, give her the check." The lawyer handed Sarah a check. She didn't even look at it. She just wanted to leave. She turned to run, to flee this nightmare. "Wait!" The voice came from the main entrance. It wasn't a shout, but it carried a weight of authority that stopped everyone in their tracks. It was deep, gravelly, and commanded absolute silence. Sarah froze. James turned around, looking annoyed that his victory lap was being interrupted. Standing in the double doorway was an elderly man. He had to be in his 80s, leaning heavily on a cane topped with a silver wolf's head. He wore a charcoal suit that looked old-fashioned, but was tailored to perfection. His white hair was swept back, and his face was lined with decades of hard decisions. But it was his eyes that were terrifying. They were icy blue, sharp as razors, sweeping across the room with a look of utter contempt. Behind him stood 4 men. They weren't party security. They were large, wearing earpieces, and they looked like they could dismantle the room in under a minute. "Who the hell are you?" James asked, stepping forward. "This is a private party. Invitation only." The old man ignored James completely. He walked slowly into the room, the tap-tap-tap of his cane echoing on the marble floor. The crowd parted for him instinctively, sensing power. He walked straight up to Sarah. Sarah wiped her eyes, terrified. I'm leaving, sir. I'm sorry if I caused a scene." The old man looked at her. His expression softened, just for a fraction of a second. He looked at her face, studying her nose, her chin, her eyes. "You have your grandmother's eyes," the old man said softly. His voice trembled slightly. "Excuse me?" Sarah asked, confused. "Hey!" James marched over, blocking the old man's view of Sarah. "I asked you a question, old man. Who are you, and why are you crashing my Christmas party?" The old man finally looked at James. The look of softness vanished, replaced by a glare that could freeze water. "Your party?" the old man asked. "You think this is your party?" "I am James Remington. I own this estate." James puffed out his chest. "You own a mortgage," the old man corrected calmly. "And you own a shipping company that has been bleeding money for 3 quarters. A company that is currently afloat only because of a silent investor who injected $50 million last month." James paled. How do you know that? That's confidential board information." The old man turned to the man standing to his right, a tall, severe-looking man holding a briefcase. "Mr. Blackwood, please enlighten Mr. Remington." Mr. Blackwood stepped forward. "This is Mr. Alistair Sterling," he announced, his voice projecting to the back of the room. A gasp went through the crowd. Even Sarah knew that name. Alistair Sterling was a myth. He was the owner of Sterling Global, a conglomerate that owned half the real estate in New York, 3 pharmaceutical companies, and the silent investor, James whispered, the color draining from his face. "You're the investor." "I am," Alistair said, "and I am also the man who just watched you humiliate your wife." "Ex-wife," James corrected quickly, trying to regain his footing. "We just signed the papers. It's done. And honestly, Mr. Sterling, this is a personal matter. I appreciate your investment, but my marriage is none of your business." "It is my business," Alistair thundered, slamming his cane onto the floor. "When the woman you are bullying is my flesh and blood." The silence that followed was absolute. Sarah stared at the old man. "What?" Alistair turned back to Sarah. His hands were shaking as he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an old, tattered photograph. He handed it to her. Sarah looked at the photo. It was black and white. It showed a young couple laughing on a park bench. The woman in the photo looked exactly like Sarah. That's my mother," Sarah whispered, "but she died when I was a baby. I was raised in foster care. I don't know who her family was." "Her name was Diana," Alistair said, tears welling in his eyes. "She was my daughter. She ran away 30 years ago because she fell in love with a man I didn't approve of. I was proud. I was stubborn. I told her if she left, she was cut off. She left. I spent 20 years looking for her, only to find out she had died in a car accident. But the report said there was a baby girl who survived." He reached out and gently touched Sarah's cheek. "I have spent every day since then looking for you, Sarah. My granddaughter, my sole heir." The room spun. Sarah grabbed the table to steady herself. James let out a nervous laugh. This is a joke, right? Sarah? An heiress. She's a nobody. She worked at a diner." "She is a Sterling," Alistair snapped, his voice cutting like a whip. "And as of this moment, she is the primary shareholder of Sterling Global. Which means—" Alistair turned his cold eyes back to James. A slow, cruel smile spread across the old man's face. "Which means, Mr. Remington, she is now your boss." James looked at the divorce papers in his hand. The papers that Sarah had just signed. The papers that gave her $10,000 and severed all legal ties to him. "Wait," James stammered, looking from the papers to Sarah, panic setting in. "Sarah, baby, wait. We haven't filed these yet. It's not official until they're filed." He tried to tear the papers in half. "Stop!" Mr. Blackwood shouted. But before James could rip them, Sarah's hand shot out. She didn't grab the papers. She grabbed the check, the $10,000 check James had thrown at her. She held it up to the light. Then, slowly, deliberately, she ripped the check into tiny pieces and let them flutter to the floor like snow. "You're right, James," Sarah said, her voice stronger than it had ever been. She wiped the last tear from her cheek. "We haven't filed them yet." James let out a sigh of relief. "Exactly." "Oh, thank God. Sarah, honey, I was just stressed. The business, the holidays. I didn't mean it. We can fix this, we can—" "No," Sarah interrupted. She stepped closer to him, her eyes locking onto his. "I mean, you haven't filed them. So technically, I'm still your wife." Yes, you are." James beamed, reaching for her hand. "Which means," Sarah said, pulling her hand away, "I'm entitled to half of your assets during the divorce proceedings. But now," she looked at her grandfather, "now I have the best lawyers in the world." She turned to Alistair. "Grandfather, can we sue him for emotional distress and fraud and maybe public defamation?" Alistair Sterling smiled, and it was the smile of a wolf who had just found a very fat rabbit. "My dear," Alistair said, linking his arm through hers, "we can take the shirt off his back. We can take the house. We can take the company. We can take everything." Sarah looked at James, then at Jessica, who was currently trying to inch away into the crowd. She looked at Catherine, whose mouth was hanging open. "Good," Sarah said. "Let's start with the house. Get out." James blinked. "What?" "Get out!" Sarah screamed, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "This is my Christmas party now." The heavy oak doors of the Remington estate slammed shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot that signaled the end of an era. Outside, the winter air was biting. Snow had begun to fall, dusting the manicured hedges and the hoods of the luxury cars that the valets were scrambling to retrieve for the stunned guests. James Remington stood on the front steps of the house he no longer controlled, shivering in his tuxedo. The wind cut through the thin fabric, but the cold in his chest was far worse. Beside him, Catherine was practically vibrating with rage, her red velvet dress now looking garish under the harsh security lights. "Do something, James!" Catherine shrieked, clutching her bare arms. "Don't just stand there like a statue. Go back in there and talk to her. She's your wife." "She just kicked us out, Mother," James snapped, running a hand through his gelled hair, ruining the perfect style. "Did you see the security guards? That wasn't Sarah in there. That was someone else." "It's that old man," Jessica chimed in. She was busy typing furiously on her phone, likely trying to secure a ride, since James's driver had been instructed by Mr. Blackwood to stay put. "The grandfather. He brainwashed her." James turned on Jessica, his eyes wild. "Put the phone away. If this gets out on social media before I can spin it, the stock price will tank by morning." Jessica looked up, her expression sour. The facade of the adoring mistress was slipping. "The stock price. James, you just lost the primary investor. The stock is going to zero regardless of what I tweet. And by the way, my Uber is 2 minutes away. I'm not standing in a blizzard for you." "You're leaving?" James asked, incredulous. "We're in this together. We were in this together when you were the CEO of a rising empire," Jessica said coldly, pulling her faux fur wrap tighter. "Now you're a man being sued by the richest family in New York. I have a reputation to protect. My father is a senator, remember? I can't be seen with a target." A black sedan pulled up. Jessica didn't even say goodbye. She hopped in, and the car sped away, leaving James and his mother standing alone in the snow. Inside the warmth of the estate, the atmosphere was entirely different. The guests had been politely but firmly asked to leave by Mr. Blackwood's security team. The ballroom, once filled with chatter and judgment, was now silent. Sarah sat on a velvet settee near the fireplace, a cup of hot tea in her hands. She was still shaking, but for the first time in years, it wasn't from fear. It was from adrenaline. Alistair Sterling sat opposite her, his cane resting against his knee. He watched her with a mixture of pride and sorrow. "I didn't know," Sarah whispered, staring into the flames. "I thought I was alone in the world." "You were never truly alone, Sarah," Alistair said gently. "I had investigators looking for you for 2 decades. But your father, he was good at hiding. He changed your last name to Miller to protect you from me. He thought I was a monster." Alistair sighed, looking old and tired. "Perhaps back then I was. I was obsessed with control. But losing my daughter changed me. Finding you, it's the only thing that matters now." Sarah looked up at him. "What happens now, grandfather? James, he won't give up. He loves money more than he loves breathing." "Let him try," Alistair said, his eyes hardening. "Tomorrow morning, the war begins. But you won't be fighting it with a plastic knife, Sarah. You have the Sterling legal team. We don't just win cases, we dismantle opponents." The next 48 hours were a blur of activity that Sarah could barely comprehend. She was moved from the guest cottage, where she had been relegated by James during their marriage, into the master suite of the estate. But she didn't stay there long. Alistair insisted she move to the Sterling penthouse in the city for safety. By Monday morning, the ceasefire was over. Sarah walked into the conference room of Blackwood Hale and Associates, wearing a suit that cost more than her car. It was a sharp, white-tailored blazer and trousers, chosen by Alistair's personal stylist. She wore her hair back, her face clean of makeup, except for a bold red lip. She looked like a CEO. She looked like a sterling. James was already there, sitting on the opposite side of the long mahogany table. He looked like he hadn't slept in 2 days. His eyes were bloodshot, his tie slightly crooked. Next to him sat his lawyer, a sweaty man named Richard Hemsley, who was known for nasty divorce tactics, but looked visibly intimidated by the army of lawyers on Sarah's side. "Sarah," James said, standing up as she entered. He put on his best, remorseful husband face. "You look beautiful. Look, honey, can we stop this madness? Just the two of us? We don't need all these suits." Sarah didn't even look at him. She pulled out the chair at the head of the table, not the side, the head, and sat down. "Sit down, James," Mr. Blackwood said, placing a stack of files on the table. James sat, his jaw tightening. "We are here to discuss the terms of the separation," Mr. Hemsley began, trying to sound authoritative. "My client asserts that the papers signed on Christmas Eve were done so under extreme emotional duress and while intoxicated, rendering them void. James loves his wife. He wants to pursue counseling." Sarah laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "Counseling? Is that what you call it when you bring your mistress to our holiday party and hand me divorce papers as a gift?" "That was a misunderstanding," James said quickly. She's an assertive employee. She overstepped. I fired her this morning." "You didn't fire her," Sarah corrected calmly, opening a folder in front of her. "She dumped you via text message at 3 a.m. on Sunday. We have the phone records." James turned pale. "How do you—" "We have everything, James," Sarah said, leaning forward. "But let's talk about the divorce. You want to void the papers?" "Fine. I agree." James blinked, hope flickering in his eyes. "You do?" "Yes," Sarah smiled warmly. "I want to file for a contested divorce instead, on the grounds of adultery, emotional abuse, and financial fraud." The room went deadly silent. Mr. Hemsley dropped his pen. "Fraud?" James squeaked. "That's ridiculous. The company is clean." "Is it?" Mr. Blackwood interjected. "Because according to the terms of the Sterling Global Investment, any misappropriation of funds allows the primary investor to conduct an immediate, hostile takeover of the board. And since Miss Sterling here is the heir to the investor—" "We are freezing your assets, James," Sarah said, her voice turning to steel. "All of them. The personal accounts, the joint accounts, the offshore accounts you thought I didn't know about in the Caymans. You can't buy a cup of coffee without my permission starting 10 minutes ago." James slammed his hands on the table. "You can't do that. I built that company. You were just a waitress. You don't know anything about business." "I know enough to know that you don't cross a sterling," Sarah said, standing up. "You gave me $10,000 to leave, James. I'm going to leave you with 10 cents. She turned to walk out. "Sarah, please!" James shouted, desperation cracking his voice. "My mother. She needs her medication. The house has a mortgage. If you freeze the accounts, we'll be on the street in a month." Sarah stopped at the door. She looked back over her shoulder. "The guest cottage is empty," she said coldly. "If you pay rent, I might let you stay there." The victory in the boardroom felt good, but Alistair had warned Sarah that a wounded animal is the most dangerous. James was cornered, but he wasn't dead yet. 2 weeks passed. Sarah threw herself into understanding the family business. She wasn't content to just be a figurehead. She spent her days in the Sterling Global offices, learning about asset management, forensic accounting, and corporate law. She had a sharp mind, one that had been stifled for years by a husband who wanted her to be nothing more than a pretty accessory. It was late on a Tuesday evening. The city lights of New York twinkled below the glass walls of Sarah's new office. She was poring over the financial records of Remington Logistics, James's company. Alastair had hired a forensic accountant named David Chen to dig through the digital debris of James's empire. David knocked on her open door. "Ms. Osterling?" David said, his face grim. "You need to see this." Sarah rubbed her temples. "What is it, David? More jewelry bought on the company card?" "Worse," David said, walking in and plugging his tablet into the large monitor on the wall. "Much worse. We found a subledger. It was hidden deep in the server, encrypted under a file named Project Phoenix." "Project Phoenix?" Sarah frowned. "James isn't that creative. What is it?" "It's a laundering scheme," David explained, pulling up a spiderweb of transactions. James wasn't just losing money due to bad business decisions, he was bleeding the company on purpose. "Look here." He pointed to a series of transfers. "Every time Sterling Global injected capital, the $50 million from your grandfather, the $10 million before that, James would immediately transfer 40% of it to a shell company in Zurich called Red Velvet Holdings." "Red Velvet?" Sarah paused. The name triggered a memory, a visual. "Catherine." "Excuse me?" "His mother," Sarah whispered, her blood running cold. "Catherine. She always wears red velvet. It's her signature. She made a joke about it at the Christmas party." "Well," David clicked a button, revealing the owner of the shell company. "You're right. The signatory for Red Velvet Holdings is Catherine Remington." Sarah stood up, pacing the room. "So, they were stealing from my grandfather together. James and his mother." "It gets darker," David said. He hesitated. "Sarah, look at the dates of the withdrawals." Sarah looked. The first massive withdrawal was 3 years ago. That's the month we got married," Sarah realized. "Exactly," David said. "I found emails between James and Catherine. They didn't marry you because they loved you, Sarah. They didn't even marry you because they thought you were a charity case, as they claimed." David opened an email on the screen. It was from Catherine to James, dated 3 years prior. Subject: "The perfect candidate, James. Stop worrying about the IRS audit. We need a scapegoat. Find someone with no family, no connections, and no financial literacy. Someone naive. Marry her. Put her name on the subsidiary boards as the treasurer. We funnel the debt to her. When the company collapses, we divorce her, leave her with the debt, and she goes to prison for embezzlement while we retire to the Zurich accounts. The girl at the diner, Sarah? She's perfect. She has no one to fight for her." Sarah read the email. Then she read it again. The air left her lungs. She fell back into her chair, feeling physically ill. It wasn't just a bad marriage. It wasn't just him cheating with Jessica. It was a setup. From the very first date, the very first smile, the very first "I love you," it was all a long con to frame her for federal prison. They had planned to ruin her life, not by accident, but by design. They wanted to steal millions from investors, including her own grandfather, and leave her to rot in a cell while they lived off the stolen cash in Switzerland. "They were going to send me to prison," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling with a rage so pure it felt like white heat. "The audit trail proves they had already started the process," David said gently. "They falsified your signature on the loan documents last month. If your grandfather hadn't walked into that party, the FBI would have been knocking on your door by February." Sarah closed her eyes. She thought of James's face when he handed her the divorce papers, the cruelty, the haste. He wasn't just leaving her for Jessica. He was ejecting before the crash, ensuring she was the one in the pilot's seat when it hit the mountain. "Where are they now?" Sarah asked, opening her eyes. They were dry. She was done crying. "They are currently at the Remington estate," David said. "They are refusing to vacate, claiming squatters' rights to buy time. James is trying to liquidate the few assets we haven't frozen yet to flee the country." Sarah stood up and walked to the window. She looked out at the city that was now hers. "Call Mr. Blackwood," Sarah commanded, "and call the police. I want the district attorney on the line, too." "What are you going to do?" David asked. Sarah turned around. Her expression was terrifyingly calm. It was the face of a woman who had just realized her entire past was a lie, and she was ready to burn the liars to the ground. "I'm not going to sue them for divorce anymore, David," Sarah said. "I'm going to have them arrested for racketeering, grand larceny, and conspiracy." She grabbed her coat. "Get the car. We're going back to the house. I want to look James in the eye when the handcuffs go on." The drive to the Remington estate took 40 minutes. A convoy of 3 black SUVs moved in formation. In the lead car, Sarah sat next to Alistair. "Are you sure you want to do this yourself?" Alistair asked, holding her hand. "I have to," Sarah said. "For 3 years I thought I wasn't enough. I thought I was the problem. I need to see them realize that I was never the victim. I was the trap they stepped into." The cars pulled up the long driveway. But as the estate came into view, Sarah gasped. Lights were flashing everywhere. Blue and red lights, police cars, an ambulance. "What's happening?" Sarah asked, leaning forward. Mr. Blackwood, sitting in the front seat, checked his phone. "It's a disturbance call. Neighbors reported screaming." The convoy stopped. Sarah jumped out before the security could open the door. She ran toward the front steps, her heels clicking on the icy pavement. The front door was wide open. Inside the grand foyer, chaos reigned. James was on the floor, holding a bloody towel to his nose. Catherine was screaming at a police officer who was trying to restrain her. And standing in the middle of the room, looking like a disheveled banshee, was Jessica. Jessica had returned, and she had a tire iron in her hand. "You lied to me!" Jessica screamed at James, swinging the tire iron at a priceless vase, smashing it to pieces. "You told me you had money. You told me the accounts were just temporarily frozen. My credit card was declined at the hotel, James. Do you know how embarrassing that is?" "Jessica, put the weapon down," the officer shouted, hand on his holster. "He promised me a yacht," Jessica wailed, tears streaming down her face, ruining her spray tan. "I wasted 2 years on this loser." Sarah stepped into the foyer. "That's enough." The room froze. Everyone turned to look at Sarah. She stood framed by the doorway, flanked by her grandfather's security team and Mr. Blackwood. James looked up from the floor, blood dripping through his fingers. When he saw Sarah, he didn't look angry. He looked relieved. "Sarah!" James scrambled to his feet, stumbling toward her. "Thank God! Tell these crazy people. Tell the police it's a misunderstanding. I'm your husband. We can fix this." He reached out for her with his bloody hand. A security guard stepped in, shoving James back hard. He fell onto the stairs. Sarah walked forward slowly, stepping over the shattered remains of the vase. She looked at Jessica, who was panting heavily. "You can drop the act, Jessica," Sarah said. "And the tire iron. You're not the victim here either. You knew about the money laundering. We found the transfers to your father's campaign fund." Jessica dropped the iron with a clang. Her face went white. Sarah turned to Catherine. The older woman straightened her back, trying to regain her dignity, even while being handcuffed by an officer. "You have no proof," Catherine spat. "You're a nothing, A nobody. Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper, the printout of the email. Subject: the perfect candidate. She held it up. "I know everything, Catherine," Sarah said softly. "I know about Red Velvet Holdings. I know about the plan to frame me. I know you picked me because you thought I was weak." She stepped closer until she was inches from Catherine's face. "But you forgot one thing about predators, Catherine," Sarah whispered. "Sometimes they pick the wrong prey. You didn't marry James to a waitress. You married him to a sterling." The police officer tightened the cuffs on Catherine's wrists. "Catherine Remington, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud and embezzlement." "And you," the other officer said, hauling James to his feet and spinning him around. "James Remington, you're under arrest for the same." James looked at Sarah, tears mixing with the blood on his face. "Sarah, please, I'm sorry. I loved you. In my own way, I loved you." Sarah watched as they dragged him toward the door. As he passed her, she leaned in and whispered the words he had said to her at the party. "Titles are temporary, James. Prison is forever." The doors closed behind them, leaving Sarah standing in the silent, empty hall. Alistair walked up beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "It's over, my dear." Sarah looked around the house. It was a beautiful house, but it was rot at the foundation. "No, grandfather," Sarah said, turning away from the wreckage of her marriage. "This part is over. My life, it's just starting." She walked out into the cold night air, but for the first time in her life, she didn't feel the chill. She felt fire. 6 months had passed since the flashing lights of the police cruisers illuminated the snow at the Remington estate. The snow had long melted, replaced by the humid heat of a New York July. But for James and Catherine Remington, the world had remained frozen in that moment of destruction. The Remington versus the People trial had become a national obsession. The tabloids called it the Cinderella Revenge. Every news channel broadcasted the downfall of the once prominent shipping family. Sarah sat in the front row of the gallery, her back straight, her hands folded calmly in her lap. She looked nothing like the terrified woman in the navy dress from Christmas Eve. Today, she wore a tailored slate-grey suit, her hair cut into a sharp, chic bob that framed a face which no longer held any trace of apology. Beside her sat Alistair Sterling. His health had improved significantly since finding his granddaughter. He looked 10 years younger, energized by the fight. "Are you ready for this?" Alistair whispered, patting her hand. "I've been ready for 6 months," Sarah replied, her voice steady. The bailiff announced the arrival of the judge. The heavy doors to the side opened, and the defendants were led in. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Catherine Remington, once the picture of high society dominance, looked frail. Her roots were showing, a stark grey against the dyed blonde, and her skin was sallow. She refused to look at the gallery. Then came James. If Catherine looked defeated, James looked desperate. He had lost 20 pounds. His suit, clearly one of the few he had left, hung loosely on his frame. His eyes darted around the room until they locked onto Sarah. He offered a weak, pleading smile, as if trying to invoke some ghost of their past intimacy. Sarah didn't smile back. She looked at him with the clinical detachment of a scientist observing a specimen in a jar. The prosecution was led by a man named Gabriel Cross. He was a rising star in the district attorney's office, young, brilliant, and known for a moral compass that pointed true north. He stood up, adjusting his glasses, and addressed the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen," Gabriel began, his voice baritone and commanding, "greed is a common motive. But what you will see in this trial goes beyond greed. It is a story of calculated cruelty. The defendants didn't just want to steal money. They wanted to destroy a life to cover their tracks. Gabriel called his first witness, David Chen, the forensic accountant. For 3 hours the courtroom was bombarded with charts, emails, and bank records. The Project Phoenix scheme was laid bare. Every dollar stolen, every signature forged, every email mocking Sarah's intelligence was projected onto a massive screen. Sarah watched James as the evidence mounted. He was sweating profusely, whispering furiously to his public defender. His high-priced lawyers had abandoned him months ago when the assets were frozen. "Mr. Chen," Gabriel asked, pacing in front of the jury box, "based on these emails, what was the ultimate goal for Sarah Miller?" "Incarceration," David stated clearly. The debt was structured to default in her name. The plan was for James Remington to tip off the IRS anonymously once the divorce was finalized. Sarah would have faced a minimum of 15 years in federal prison for embezzlement. A gasp went through the courtroom. Sarah felt a cold shiver, even though she knew the facts. Hearing it said out loud in a court of law made the malice real again. "Thank you," Gabriel said. He turned to look at Sarah, offering a brief, reassuring nod before turning back to the judge. The prosecution calls Sarah Sterling to the stand. Sarah stood up. The room went silent. She walked to the witness stand, swearing on the Bible. "Ms. Sterling," Gabriel said gently, "can you tell the court about the night of December 24th? Sarah took a breath. She recounted the party, the humiliation, the divorce papers thrown into the holly bowl, the $10,000 check. Then it was the defense's turn. James's lawyer, a harried man named Mr. Klein, stood up. He knew he had a losing hand, so he decided to attack the victim. "Ms. Sterling," Klein said, buttoning his cheap jacket, "you claim you were a victim. Yet you lived in luxury for 3 years. You signed tax returns. You benefited from the Remington lifestyle. Is it possible you knew about the fraud and only turned on my client when you found out he was having an affair?" It was a dirty tactic. The gallery rumbled with disapproval. Sarah leaned into the microphone. Her eyes were hard. "Mr. Klein," she said, her voice projecting to the back of the room without shouting, "I cooked his meals, I cleaned his house, I nursed him when he was sick. I lived on an allowance of $200 a week while he spent thousands on dinners with his mistress. I signed what he told me to sign because I trusted my husband. If my crime was loving a liar, then I am guilty. But I am not the one wearing an orange jumpsuit beneath a suit." Currents of electricity seemed to zap through the air. Mr. Klein opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked at the jury. They were glaring at him. "No further questions," Klein muttered, sitting down. As Sarah stepped down from the stand, a recess was called. She walked out into the hallway, needing air. "Sarah." She turned. It was Gabriel Cross. He looked tired but focused. "You were incredible in there," Gabriel said. "I've seen a lot of witnesses crumble under cross-examination. You didn't flinch." "I have nothing to hide, Mr. Cross," Sarah said. "That gives me a certain advantage." "Please call me Gabriel," he said, a genuine smile breaking his serious demeanor. It changed his face, making him look younger, warmer. "And I wanted to tell you, we found something else, a recording." Catherine taped her conversations with the Swiss bankers, just in case she needed leverage against James. "We're playing it tomorrow. It's the final nail in the coffin." "They turned on each other?" Sarah asked. "Completely," Gabriel nodded. "Rats on a sinking ship." He paused, checking his watch. "Look, I know this is unprofessional, but once this trial is over, I'd like to take you for coffee. not to discuss evidence, just to talk. Sarah looked at him. He was handsome, yes, with dark curly hair and kind hazel eyes, but more importantly, he was honest. She could see it. "Ask me after the verdict, Gabriel," Sarah said softly. "I will," he promised. The next day, the recording was played. It was brutal. Catherine's voice filled the courtroom, shrill and demanding, instructing the bankers on how to hide the assets and explicitly stating, "Make sure the girl takes the fall. She's stupid enough to sign anything." James put his head in his hands. Catherine stared straight ahead, a single tear leaking from her eye, not of remorse, but of fury at being caught. When the closing arguments finished, the jury didn't need long. They deliberated for 4 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood up. Sarah gripped Alistair's hand so hard her knuckles turned white. In the matter of the people versus James Remington and Catherine Remington, we find the defendants guilty on all counts. The words hung in the air like the ringing of a bell. Guilty of grand larceny, guilty of securities fraud, guilty of conspiracy, guilty of racketeering. James let out a strangled sob. He turned to look at Sarah, his face a mask of terror. "Sarah, Sarah, please, don't let them take me. I can change, I swear." Catherine didn't scream. She simply slumped in her chair, aging 20 years in 20 seconds. The Iron Lady had finally rusted through. The judge slammed his gavel. "Order! The defendants will rise for sentencing." Because of the severity of the fraud, the amount of money stolen, over $60 million, and the malicious intent to frame an innocent party, the judge showed no mercy. "James Remington, I sentence you to 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Catherine Remington, I sentence you to 20 years. As the bailiffs moved in to cuff them, James lunged toward the gallery rail. "Sarah, look at me. I'm your husband." Sarah stood up slowly. She walked to the railing. James stopped struggling, hope flaring in his eyes. He thought she was going to intervene. He thought she still cared. Sarah looked down at him. "You wanted a legacy, James," she said, her voice calm and final. "Now you have one. You'll be the cautionary tale they teach in business school." She turned her back on him. "Sarah!" he screamed as they dragged him out the side door. The sound of his voice faded, replaced by the murmurs of the crowd and the shuffling of papers. It was over. 1 year later, it was Christmas Eve again. The snow was falling softly over New York City. But this year, Sarah wasn't standing in the corner of a ballroom feeling invisible. She stood on the stage of the Sterling Miller Foundation charity gala. The venue was the same ballroom where her life had fallen apart, the Remington estate. But the estate looked different now. The cold, austere decorations were gone. The gold and silver were replaced with warm, vibrant colors. The heavy, oppressive portraits of Remington ancestors had been taken down, replaced by artwork from local youth programs. Sarah had bought the estate at the government auction. James and Catherine's assets had been seized to pay back the investors, and the house had gone to the highest bidder. Sarah had outbid everyone. She hadn't bought it to live in. She had turned it into a sanctuary, the Diana House, named after her mother. It was now a transitional housing facility and legal aid center for women escaping abusive relationships and financial coercion. Sarah adjusted the microphone. She wore a dress of deep emerald green velvet, reclaiming the fabric Catherine had once used to mock her. She looked radiant. "Thank you all for coming," Sarah said, smiling at the crowd. This time, the crowd consisted of donors, social workers, and the women who were living in the house. There were no judgmental socialites. "A year ago, I stood in this room and thought my life was over. I signed a piece of paper that I thought defined my worth. But I learned that worth isn't something anyone can give you, and it certainly isn't something they can take away. The crowd applauded. In the front row, Alistair Sterling clapped the loudest, beaming with pride. Next to Alistair sat Gabriel. He and Sarah had gone for that coffee, and then dinner, and then, slowly, carefully, they had built something real. He wasn't James. He didn't want a trophy. He wanted a partner. Sarah looked at Gabriel and winked. He grinned, giving her a thumbs up. "Tonight," Sarah continued, "we celebrate not just survival, but rebirth. This house was built on greed, but it will stand on generosity. Merry Christmas, everyone." As the music started, a warm jazz number, not the stiff classical music of the past, Sarah walked off the stage. Gabriel met her at the bottom of the steps. "You were amazing." "I felt amazing," Sarah admitted. "It feels clean. The ghosts are gone." "They are," Gabriel agreed. He handed her a glass of champagne. "To new traditions." "To new traditions," Sarah toasted. She looked across the room. She saw women laughing, children playing near the massive tree, and her grandfather holding court with a group of donors. Sarah walked over to the large window, looking out over the snowy grounds. She thought of James, sitting in a cold cell in upstate New York. She felt no anger anymore, only a distant pity. He had chased the world and lost his soul. She had lost her world and found herself. Alistair walked up beside her, leaning on his cane. "What are you thinking about, my dear?" "I was thinking about that check," Sarah said, watching the snow fall. "The $10,000. "A pittance," Alistair scoffed. "No," Sarah smiled. "It was the best gift he ever gave me, because when I ripped it up, I realized I was priceless." She turned back to the party, to the warmth, to the love that filled the room. "Come on, grandfather," Sarah said, taking his arm. "Let's dance. I believe I promised you the first dance a year ago, and I intend to keep my word." As they moved to the dance floor, Sarah Sterling, CEO, philanthropist, and survivor, finally had the Christmas she deserved. And that is the incredible story of Sarah, a woman who went from a discarded wife to a powerful heiress in a single night. It's a reminder that sometimes, when you think you've hit rock bottom, you're actually standing on a gold mine of hidden potential. James and Catherine thought they could crush her, but they only succeeded in revealing her true strength. If you enjoyed this story of karma, justice, and redemption, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story. What did you think of James's punishment? Did he deserve 25 years? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next video.